Hey guys, how's it going? So I've got an old Mauser to show you guys today, and this is a Czech K98. And I've had this rifle for a little while, but I saw that Classic Firearms just got a batch of these in, so this is an old milsurp that is actually available right now. So I thought, well, better hurry up and get this video out in case some of you guys are wondering a little more about these rifles. So we're going to talk about this post-war Czechoslovakian K98, but first I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of a background info on it. So here we have a Czech VZ24 Mauser, and if you want to know more about this, I'm going to leave a link down in my description of a full video telling you all about this rifle. But basically, around 1900, a little before, a little after, the Gewehr 98 was the prominent Mauser service rifle, right? Well, as we fast forwarded to the 1920s, Czechoslovakia decided to kind of shorten things up and make the rifle into a little bit more of a, handy type of rifle. So what they did is they shortened the barrel down to just a little under 24 inches, got the weight of the rifle down to just a little over 8 pounds, and this rifle, made in Czechoslovakia at the factory at Brno, the VZ24 designation right there, actually predated the K98 Mauser by about 10 years, being generally about the size of a K98, but still retaining the older style bolt with the straight cocking handle here, straight bolt handle of the Gewehr 98. So this rifle was made for a long time, from the 1920s at Brno all the way up until the early 1940s. So World War II rolls around. Germany comes in there, the Third Reich, they occupy Czechoslovakia, and they take over production of the Brno factory. Now this rifle continues to be made for a couple of years under German occupation, under names such as the G33, G40. Well, in about 1943, orders come down from the Reich command that they need to pump up, the production of K98 Mausers. So the factory at Brno stops making the VZ24 and starts making German K98s. Now, they were made in Czechoslovakia, but they would have the German proof marks and be made to the exacting, German standards of that time. Because again, it was Czechoslovakia, but it was kind of sort of Germany, if you know what I mean, with the occupation, right? So, fast forwarding, World War II comes to an end. Now, many of the arms manufacturers in World War II were bombed, badly damaged, torn apart, things like that. But the factory at Brno was a little bit different. It actually remained pretty much untouched. So as soon as the Germans were kicked out of their country, the Czechs were sitting there with a completely ready to go factory, right? Where they not only had all the tooling and all the production lines set up, but they had tons of these German K98 rifles that were either completely assembled, partially assembled, tons of parts that were made to different extents, finished parts, partially made parts, things like that. Basically, Germans were in full production, they left. Czechoslovakia said, well, we're going to put this to good use. So they didn't want to go back to the VZ24. This was a little more updated design, and plus they had all the tooling and parts ready. So they did the natural thing that almost anyone would have done. Around 1945, they started production of these post-war K98 Mausers. So what do we have here? Well, these rifles can be composed of several things. The very early ones were essentially all German-proofed parts, right? Occupation built. And they would use those parts. And as time went on, they started running out of certain parts. So post-war Czechoslovakia would start to make different things for these. Receivers, parts, etc. So you could find parts that were made during the war. You could find parts that were made post-war. And you could find a gun that, quite frankly, has a combination. And that's basically what we have here. So let's just take a quick look at the rifle here one more time. Looking pretty close to a standard K98. You might be noticing a couple differences right off the bat. So let's just go through this. We'll go from the back to the front. So typically on a K98, you will see that there is a hole here, right, with a metal ferrule And that's called your takedown disc. There's a hole in the middle, right, with a piece of hardware. And that's if you're familiar with taking down the bolt of a Mauser. You have to put pressure and let the firing pin, protrude down to where you can unscrew it. Well, to save a little bit of money, increase production numbers and speed, they deleted that. And they just went with the cupped style butt plate, as we see here, with a hole in the back. So this serves as your takedown disc right here. Nice and simple. Maybe not quite as easy to use as one in the stock, but I would guess very functional. We have the sling slot, just like your typical K98, where it would loop through the buttstock with the wood carved out where your buckle would go. We have a laminated wood stock, which could be found on a lot of the German-made K98s. Some had hardwood stocks, and as production went on, they switched to laminate. It's kind of a personal preference. Some people like the look of the laminate more. Some people like the look of the hardwood more, but most people would agree the laminate stocks are probably a little more robust and more suited for the average battle environment. We have the famous Mauser action with the bent bolt. These feature a 5-round internal magazine. And this rifle is chambered in the good old-fashioned 8mm Mauser. Coming up a little bit further forward, we have a tangent sight graduated out to 2,000 meters. Upper wood handguard. Barrel band with sling swivel. There's your front sling swivel that would incorporate the sling back into the buttstock. We have our front band. This is of a later variant where you can see it is of the welded design. This is not the older style H band that is somewhat more common and popular on the Mausers, but this would indeed be a late war / post-war design here. We do still have the bayonet lug. We have a front bladed sight. Now these sights originally came with a hood on them. But if you look at how the hood attached, there's just a little groove milled in here, and it was just a tight friction fit with a little bit of spring tension. So you might still find these with the hood on them, and you might not. It's kind of hit and miss. Probably just as common to find one without one as with, if not even a little more common this way. So this is kind of typical fare here with it missing the front sight hood. But these can be purchased. Just regular K98 hood here. So I said these are basically German Mausers, but they're a little bit different. So let me show you guys a couple of a little bit different features here. Right away, we're going to look at the receiver, okay? And we're going to see that this is stamped that it was made in Czechoslovakia at Brno. We're also going to see on the side of the chamber area here a serial number with a letter at the end. And we're going to see the rampant lion, as it's called, proof mark here, and then again further up on the barrel. Now, that was basically a proof testing mark, meaning this was fired, safe, passed the test, right? You guys know what proof marks are probably. So this was definitely proofed by the Czechs. Now, some of these you will see will still actually have the Mod 98 on the side. That would have been one that was made during occupied Germany. This receiver was probably made after the fact. Okay, speaking of markings, we're going to look here on the top of the chamber area, and we're going to notice that the markings are completely scrubbed off. And there's basically a couple ways you can see these marked. You can find these where they're completely scrubbed like this, and this is considered normal and acceptable because many of them were this way after the war. Now you could also see them with a couple other markings on them. You could see them with a dot, a DOT number with like a number behind it. So you could see like a DOT 44, 45, even maybe a DOT 50, because these were manufactured after the war from 1945, so probably about 1950. Now, you could also find these in very rare instances with that rampant lion crest on here. Those are actually very rare and would be considered to be a collector's item if you have one in the United States that still has that on there today. So basically, like I said earlier, the war was over. Czechoslovakia had an assembly line, the tooling, tons of parts. So they made these not only for their own army, they also made them for export. And one of their first big customers was actually Israel. Israel was looking to kind of sort of standardize to a rifle, but as you guys know the history of Israel, they kind of sort of never did. But they did buy a lot of these from Czechoslovakia and then would rechamber them in 7.62 NATO. Those are pretty cool rifles. I don't have one, but there's info on those if you guys are, interested. This one is still chambered in the original 8mm. So they basically started these off for domestic production with the big lion's crest, right? Like their national crest there. And they started exporting them to Israel that way. But after a short period of time, they decided, no, we're only going to put the crest on them for domestically produced rifles. And we are going to just put the manufacturer's mark, that post-war like DOT or SWP markings for export rifles. So if the rifle was originally made for export, you'll probably see those markings on there, okay? If the rifle was made for Czech, domestic production, you're probably going to most likely find it just like this. And here's why. Czechoslovakia made these again for themselves, for their army, and kept making them all the way till probably about 1950. And then at that point, shortly thereafter, the VZ52 came in. That would have been the transitional semi-automatic rifle, 7.62. And then it went to the 7.62 by 39, VZ52-57, okay? Then just a year later, they went to the VZ58, which is the select fire rifle that looks a lot like an AK, but it's milled and it's actually not really an AK at all. And if you guys are interested in the VZ58, let me know. I have a couple of them and I can do a video on that if you guys are into those, Czech or other Czech rifles. So basically Czechoslovakia had no more use for these at that point. So they ended up exporting to other countries their domestically produced that were originally in service with their army. Now, it's unknown for sure, but many people think that they ground the crest off before they exported it. Possibly the countries that received these ground it off when they got there. But it's generally accepted knowledge that anything that had the original domestic, crest that was put into service in Czechoslovakia, it was removed by the time it got sold to another country. So obviously, these getting exported out of Czechoslovakia in the 1950s, by the time they made it to the United States, they were in the hands of at least one other country, right? If not others. So it'd be cool to get one of these with the lion on there. It's also cool to have the ones that just simply have the date code on there, right? And the post-war Czech markings. But these are also acceptable. And this is still considered an original rifle with this ground off. So I just thought I'd go over the markings just a little bit there. Now, they did use some World War II era parts, like I said earlier. And as you guys probably know, when the Germans made parts, they put Waffenamts on like everything, right? Even if they were made in an occupied factory. Because the Waffenampt is the acceptance mark. And it's usually an eagle with some numbers under it. So I was poking around this thing, and this does indeed have a Waffenampt on one of the parts. So we're going to look underneath this rear tangent sight, see if my camera will focus in. It's kind of hard to see, but that little marking right there is indeed a German Waffenamt. The bluing's just so shiny there, guys. My camera's having a little bit of a hard time, but I assure you that is a Waffenamt. So we have some post-occupation World War II Czech-made parts and Czech markings. We also still have some original Third Reich World War II markings, which kind of shows the history of these rifles, how it was from an era of Czechs making their own production rifle, the VZ24. Germans occupied, kept making the VZ24 for a couple more years. Switched over to the K98 for the Germans. Germans left. The Czechs took advantage of a bad situation they were in with being occupied, but at least they tried to make the best out of it and utilized all of the stuff that they had here to keep on, making these rifles. So we're definitely seeing some carryover of occupied parts and modern production Czech parts. Now, one more part that's kind of cool on these that you probably noticed right away, so I thought I'd save the best for last, is the trigger guard. Instantly, you're going to see that it swoops out in a much more broader fashion, right? Much larger than a normal K98. Now, right off the bat, people want to call these a winter trigger, or a winter trigger guard. Well, it kind of is, but not exactly. So, if you go back to Germany, when Germany had their K98s, they would have the regular K98s, and then they would have their Arctic or winter versions. And they would incorporate a winter trigger guard that was a little different than this, right? But they would redesignate the rifle as a winter or Arctic rifle. Czechoslovakia never actually did that with these. Instead, what they did, just to simplify production, is as they ran out of the original German style World War II magazine floor plates and trigger guards, they developed a new design that we see here. And this is a stamped magazine floor plate and trigger guard that is essentially all one stamped piece. Again, cheaper, simplifies production. And they said, well, hold on a minute. Instead of making it where we have a winter trigger version and a not winter trigger version, they just put the big trigger guard on all of them, and they never gave it an actual winter designation or an Arctic designation. They basically said, look, this trigger guard's suitable for all climates. You can fire it just fine with no gloves, but if you do have mittens or gloves on, it's going to accommodate. So yeah, I think it's fair to call this a winter trigger guard, no problem. But if you guys are into the nitty-gritty on these and you kind of geek out like I do, I just wanted to say it's more proper to say this is technically not a winter trigger, because these post-war Czech rifles were never designated as Arctic or, you know, winter rifles. But yeah, we're going to see this. This is a Czech produced and a Czech design post-World War II part that we see under here. Stamped. Doesn't look the prettiest, but it gets the job done, and it does accommodate the shooter to have gloves or mittens on. So this is kind of, you know, typical Mauser fare, really. These aren't as collectible as a all parts matching World War II German. Probably not even as collectible as a mismatched German. There's just that whole cool factor of an original World War II era gun. These are not World War II. Physically, they're basically the same thing, but they were made for about 5 years or so after World War II. So we have the typical Mauser action that so many people love. It's very smooth on this rifle. The trigger, a little bit of uptake, a pretty firm wall, and a fairly light break. Certainly by bolt action military rifle standards, this trigger is quite nice. A little bit firm, but the take up's predictable and the break's predictable, which makes it, hey, it's acceptable. Definitely for a rifle made of this era. When the 5-round magazine's empty, the follower does come up with a little lip, and it prevents the bolt from going forward to let the soldier know that he was empty. We'll see the stripper clip guide. These could be fed individually, but we're mainly charged with charger stripper clips, you know, through the top. We see a blued finish with a little bit of patina. Typical fare for a rifle of this era, you know, about 75 years old probably, right? But yeah, these are pretty cool. They're not real common. They're not particularly rare. You know, I bought this not too long ago, really. Maybe time flies. It's been a little while, guys, but for about 300 bucks. Today, these are available for 700. It's probably what they're worth nowadays, you know? I don't know. Military surplus. When it comes in the country, it's cheap. It just seems like it keeps going up and up. Any kind of Mausers coming in now are much, much more expensive than what they used to be. So these cost a good bit nowadays, but they're still much cheaper than a nice collectible, all German made. This one I would note has a cool unit marking. Not sure what country would have put that on there. Most likely not Czechoslovakia, because this rifle was certainly sold to another country, or possibly many other countries, since the late 1940s. So yeah, neat little trigger guard design. Basically leftover parts from occupied, German-occupied Brno factory in Czechoslovakia with post-occupation, post-war parts. So these are a neat piece of Czech history, guys. They're great shooters. Great for someone that's just kind of getting into Mausers a little bit, or just really likes Czech rifles and kind of wants a piece of history that kind of has a little bit of a story to tell, from terrible things of World War II, the occupation, and then countries like Czechoslovakia that were simply trying to make the best of things and get their economy going again. And that's kind of what this rifle signifies, you know? A new generation. The war is over. Germany's gone. Czechoslovakia is a free country again, and they're going to try to get production going and rearm their army, right? So hopefully they can fend off any future invasions. They also took the opportunity to make money by exporting these to many other countries, including Israel. So neat little story, and that's why I like these rifles. And 8mm Mauser, it's a great round. It has a little bit of kick to it, guys, but it's actually pretty smooth for being a full-sized, regular, you know, battle rifle round. The other good thing about 8mm Mauser, there's still surplus available right now for a rather affordable price. You can also buy the foreign-made steel case stuff for relatively cheap. So it's not going to be as cheap as shooting 7.62 by 39 or 5.56, but you can get this ammo pretty cheap as of right now when I'm doing the filming of this for these rifles. So that's what's cool about these. The history, that these make great range shooters, and just kind of maybe someone that's getting into collecting milsurps, or you've been collecting a long time, it's just another variant, you know, to add to the collection. And you guys probably know by now, I really enjoy the history and the stories behind all these. Alright guys, well, if you like Czech firearms, let me know. I'm going to be doing a Czech pistol video very soon for a Patreon supporter who requested. And if you guys would like to help out the channel, the Patreon link is down in the description. If you like the video, like it, share, subscribe. Just watch the videos. You guys are contributing just by watching the videos, hanging out with me, leaving the comments, and that's why I have fun on here, because of all of you guys. If you're interested in other Czech rifles like the VZ58, etc., just let me know. We can do a video on those too. Alright guys, figured I'd add a little info on these Czech K98s for those of you that may have seen them recently on sale and might be kind of thinking about them. And I'm not going to tell you whether you should buy one or not, but they are available right now, and I think they're a pretty cool little piece of history and, quite frankly, great shooters. Alright, thanks for watching, and have a good one.